Episode 51, 10X-ing the hobby with hobby outsider TK, not Tony Kornheiser. Bonus. All right, waiting for that red button. Here we go. Welcome to episode number, I am not sure yet, of the Card Diary by Hobby S. Thompson. I am your host, Denny Cards, on Instagram and other less important social media platforms. I am also the self-proclaimed jack of all trades, master of none. And as I like to say sometimes in these intros, you could be listening to any podcast in the world right now, but you're here with me. However, you're here also with a very special guest for this bonus episode. And I'm going to try and do something that I haven't seen or heard done in any hobby podcast as far as I know. And that is to have on the show today, not just someone who, is a hobby participant, someone who's actually not at all in the hobby. We talk about industry insiders. This is someone who I might say is a industry outsider, not even someone who currently collects cards yet. The reason I have this person on is I have today one of my very best friends who is one of the smartest, funniest, kindest people I know. And, there's a saying about how you are the average of the 5 closest people in your life. Well, this is one of them, and he is partly to blame for me being who I am. And we're going to use the and so I would like to introduce TK. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Thank you. It's funny, that introduction was almost like I'm the Manchurian Candidate. He's the smartest, kindest, person I've ever met in my life. No, I appreciate that. And I'm glad that I can bring the average up of the 5 people who are your best friends. I'm trying to pull the average up. Yeah, I don't know if I'd even consider myself an industry outsider. I think I'm like a hobby outsider.
Yes.
I
Hobby outsider.
had a brief stint collecting, I think, the 1989 Topps baseball card series when I was a kid, when I was like 7, and totally loved it and really enjoyed it. That was like my brief stint even being a baseball fan at all, which has kind of dwindled over the years.
Mhm.
But other than that, I've definitely been outside of sports card collecting. Had a big foray in TCGs when Magic the Gathering was first coming out.
Mhm.
And a variety of the other kind of, now in retrospect, also ran TCGs that came out around that time, many of which were licensed, right? There was the Star Trek TCG and the Star Wars TCG that I think Decipher did, but they've since gone out of business. And there were a litany of like totally forgettable ones. But my approach there was always from the perspective of one who played the games. I had a background in like tabletop RPGs, like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
that was more my approach rather than the collecting side of it. But I've always kind of wondered. I've always been interested in whether and how much that world joins or doesn't.
Thank you. And this is why I really wanted to have you on, because as if people couldn't already tell, you can definitely carry a conversation. You gave me so many conversational threads to go off what you just said. You just jumped right in talking about the hobby journey, because that is why we're here, to talk about the hobby. And so thank you for being here. Before we get more into even what is the hobby, right? Because you just mentioned TCG cards and all that too. What would you like to share with the listeners so they can better know you, just from a general standpoint?
Sure, totally. So Denny and I, it's funny, we went to the same middle school briefly, but we didn't actually know each other then. We only met each other later on in school and became very good and very close friends. Uh, uh,
It's
Denny's,
okay. It's all right.
edit that one out.
No.
He's absolutely right to say that you are kind of in many ways the average of the people and I'm very glad and to consider him a close friend, a dear friend, someone who's opened my eyes up to a lot of things. I mean, certainly I kind of feel almost like I've been along for part of your hobby journey, hearing it from you offline,
Mhm.
hearing it from you, on the podcast and on the socials. Um, part of what I like about it a lot is because it isn't something that's part of my life. Like I feel like I've been granted this front row seat into a whole other world.
Mm.
And that is something that I've started actually seeing more and more in my life. I'm married. I have 2 kids. I take my kids around. I drop them off at like after school activities and stuff. And I see, here's a local card shop. Here's a local hobby shop that also includes a big card component, and they're there if you have the eyes to see them, but they
Mhm.
could also very much blend away into the background if you don't.
And we can kind of generally say that you're in the greater Baltimore area, right? We'll just keep it
Yeah,
at that.
yeah, Baltimore, Maryland for the last few years, but I grew up a New Yorker.
Yes,
And so
likewise.
I still have a little bit of that like diehard Mets thing when it was like I happened to luck into becoming a Mets fan right when they won the World Series, and I was like,
Hmm.
"Oh, this is great." And then they did not do very well for a long time. So I have like the beloggered part of the Mets fan thing, even though I haven't really paid attention to day to day baseball in a long time.
So
And
you don't.
coming down to Baltimore, it's a very very similar experience, especially recently with this magical season that just ended in utter defeat.
Oh, the Orioles. Yeah. Sorry. Really good prospects. Really
Yeah,
promising, I
right.
guess.
Trust the
Then
process.
so before we get into more, I did want to say this pre-internet, you can look things up online at at the tip of your fingertips. I totally thought Howard Johnson owned all those inns when I was a kid. You know
Okay,
exactly what I'm talking about.
no joke. As a kid, I thought like, oh, like the baseball player, right? And
Yeah.
only later did I find out. I don't want to say it was Mad Men, but I think it was close to Mad Men, where I'm like, okay,
Mm.
I'm pretty sure it's not the baseball player.
I'm like, yes, it's a really general name, but like, when you're in Queens, right, growing up, and you know about Howard Johnson, you're like
Absolutely,
driving around, in the back of your parents' car, and you're just like, wow, this guy must have so much money.
this
He's
guy's
like
doing good, right?
a hotelier and a baseball player.
Well, it's not. The funny thing is, it's kind of like not that weird on a small scale, right? Because classically, you had all these athletes who become like car dealers, like
Hmm.
later in life.
True.
Usually
Yeah.
not concurrently with them being,
Right. Right.
a player. But you have like their car dealers, or they have like a local restaurant, or they're like on a local sports broadcast or something. But now I kind of feel like it is becoming more of a thing. Like it's not just advertising, because there's always been some kind of endorsement, but like the business thing. Like I half expect Marshawn Lynch to have like a chain of restaurants, soon.
He-
Like
yeah.
beast mode
Oh,
burgers or
Mr.
something like that.
Beast, like Mr. Beast burgers, like
Yeah,
Mr.
that's it.
Beast
That
mode burgers.
someone's probably made that joke, but I think Marshawn Lynch is going to have to like truck stick Mr. Beast at one point.
Yeah.
Like I
Oh,
think that
yeah.
would
Oh
be.
my gosh. TK and I played so much Madden in the mid 2000s. Just that, what was that game mode? It was like the arcade version. It was
Yep.
the running back versus the linebacker. Just,
Yeah. Oh, it was like the shit, what was that called? It was like the sprints or the something like that.
yeah, the skills drill or something like
Yep.
that. But it was just
Yep.
so much fun. And the soundtrack was just so good. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah.
We just,
And the funny thing is, because you could mess around with the settings, it was almost like playing NFL Blitz,
yeah,
just
right.
slightly more realistic.
Yes, right. No, I remember the reason I even brought that up was because that phrase truck
The truck
stick, because
stick.
oh my
Yeah.
gosh, so much fun.
Well,
So
this
yeah,
is a totally random aside,
sure.
and this is less
This whole
hobby,
thing
more
is random. Yeah,
sports.
go
Yeah,
ahead.
that's how it goes. What One of the things I always thought was funniest is how you have things that happen in one medium that affect another, right? Like you had all of the early, like late 80s, early 90s sports games when they could be more rudimentary than like bleeps and bloops,
Mm,
very consciously we're going after what a television broadcast of a game looked like. Like you remember Tecmo Super Bowl,
yeah.
like on the NES, you'd play it,
Yes.
you'd be Bo Jackson, you'd run up and
Of
down the field because you had
course.
99 speed, you'd
Totally.
score the touchdown and there'd be this like little cinematic, this little cutscene.
Yes.
And then when Madden came out, like the fact that there was the Madden tie-in, oh, there's voice lines, there's announcers, there's whatnot. And as the games had more and more technical capacity, they started to resemble more and more what the television broadcasts looked like,
Hmm.
sounded like.
Hmm.
But what happened was the games, especially when they got into 3D, had the benefit of having these camera angles that the television broadcasts could never replicate because it was a 3D modeled world and they could do these flyovers and all that.
Hmm.
So much so that I think the folks running, NFL TV broadcasts had to invent these cable systems for the cameras to go over because people who grew up playing Madden on like PlayStation would expect that in the TV broadcast. And so you watch a TV broadcast now, it looks more like a Madden video game than it looks almost like
Skycam.
anything else.
Yeah.
Skycam, when they did the overlays for the first down line, like at first
Hmm.
they looked kind of chintzy. I mean,
The
now
yellow. Yeah. Yeah.
we get kind of used to them, but it's like the games and the TV are blending into each other now.
Totally.
Yeah,
Do you remember that commercial? We're gonna get to cards and hobbies soon, but I
eventually.
just love just chatting about this with you. Again, this is like a bonus experimental episode. Do you remember that Michael Vick Experience commercial where they were just kind of like, all right, you're in the helmet. It's like an amusement park ride. You just go in and you're just like being, you're juking, you're spinning, you're like somersaulting. You remember that, right?
Yeah. The funny thing is that definitely didn't age well because now it's like the Michael Vick Experience would have like you're waving dollar bills at the dog fighting
Oh,
ring, you know.
no. Oh, come on. You and I both have dogs. You can't say that.
It's so bad. I mean,
Oh,
but it is one of those things, right? Like a name that you look at on a piece of cardboard that you have
yeah.
like fond memories of, right?
Right.
Like who is that guy? Like you look at Tony Gwynn or something like that in an old
Mm-hmm.
card. And it's like it's one thing when he's like a rookie or a young prospect, and you look it's
Mm-hmm.
another thing when it's like now, right?
Yeah.
Um 89 cards, right? There were like young Barry Bonds with like the 70s stash.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Barry Bonds, it's always an asterisk now, you know?
Pre I was trying to say something other than steroids.
PEDs. Yeah.
PEDs, yeah. Pre like the Simpsons with the big head. The Simpsons called it out before it got like really out of there in the zeitgeist, right? They were like, look, he's got a big old head that doesn't come from
HGH.
yeah, HGH. So, okay, here's the thing. We talked Barry Bonds, we're talking Tony Gwynn. Let's get into a little bit of trading cards in the hobby, okay?
Let's do it.
Because as someone who is an outsider of not just the industry but the hobby, I almost wanted to make this episode into a what what can I do to entice you? Like, how do we get you into this hobby card today? What's gonna take for you to
Right.
drive off this lot
First
with this
first pack's
hobby
free.
card?
First pack's free, you know?
Yes, first pack's free. I mean, here's the thing, okay? And the reason I bring it up is there's something big happening in the hobby right now that you may or may not know because I don't know, if it's entering into, the news feeds that you as a non-hobby person read. And that's the licensing for two major sports, basketball and football, are transitioning from one company to another. And specifically that's Panini to Fanatics. Fanatics, it's a large umbrella. It's not just trading cards. They have, jerseys, paraphernalia,
Don't they do those
memorabilia.
like big head things you put on your wall or something?
Oh, do they
Fathead,
own
fathead.
Fatheads? Yeah, I don't know if they own Fatheads.
Okay, maybe not.
But the CEO of Fanatics in general, which includes collectibles and jerseys and a
Mhm.
whole bunch of things, is his name is Michael Rubin, and who incidentally was recently on Shark Tank, which I'm really excited about. But his very quotable kind of like soundbite is that he wants the 10x the hobby, have the 10 10, so one, what are we trying to 10x, and then two, what are we calling the hobby? Okay, so my opinion is that if we're saying we're trying to 10x the number of participants in the hobby, that it would something like this would have to happen. Someone like you who's not in the hobby would have to become a hobby participant. Someone who currently has no cards or has cards from back in the day but didn't get back into the hobby and will now start collecting cards, either whether by yourself or with your kids and all that. Conversely, okay, and we're going to just stick with the hobby part, and then we're going to get to the 10x part, and then we talk about what the hobby is. But conversely, maybe what he means is 10xing the hobby means 10xing the corporate profits or the gross revenue, and not the number of people in the hobby. So let's go from there.
Sure. I mean, so as a total outsider, I mean, and putting on like my analytical framework here, it's like who was he saying this to? Because you got to figure the target audience is a major part of how a person crafts a message and what
Mm,
even they want to talk about. Because I'm thinking if he's on a like quarterly earnings call, with investors like that you might the Wall Street stuff,
mm,
and he's like we're going to 10x. Yeah, he's definitely talking about it could be audience, right? It could be expanding the audience,
mhm,
but it has a more obviously and more clearly pecuniary, fiscal kind of aspect to it.
mhm.
He's like talking about what the revenue numbers are going to look like, so the
Right.
investors are happy and the stock price goes up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it's a little hard sometimes, I imagine, for you who is a participant in the hobby, right, to separate like you know enthusiast discussion about stuff versus what the companies are doing or not as companies as a
Mhm,
marketing endeavor.
mhm,
Um, I see that. One area where I kind of see that a little more sometimes is in like the video game, you know, discussion community, not just people who play them, but then people who like talk about, write about, post about, whatever.
mhm,
People are talking a lot about, this trend or that trend, what's going to happen, what community things are going to be. And I think the people who are involved in like making the games, just as I imagine, like the people who design cards,
Mhm.
The people who are coming up with the ideas for cards, they must love what they do because they're into it, right? Like they
Yeah.
dig it. But the
Passion.
owners of the companies aren't necessarily so aligned, right? Because for them, it
Mm.
might just be another line of revenue. And particularly if you've got a company, and I don't know Panini's whole history, but I think that they're hobby like specific, right?
Mhm.
If you've got that versus a more
Um,
diversified company,
I
you know,
I know they started with the stickers, collectibles. Yeah, they had stickers and then trading cards because they got the license. And I think a lot of, again, this is all like more than 10 years ago, but when they obtained the NBA license, I think the NBA was the one who said that they wanted to have it all under one company or under one roof. So I don't even know if Panini was like, we got to make it exclusive. I think the NBA brand was like, we want to go global. We want to, and please, if I'm wrong, someone's gonna DM me and let me know. But my understanding is that that they had stickers and mostly like say soccer stickers, and then they went into other sports and not just stickers but trading cards. The cardboard, like the three and
mhm.
a half by 2.5, as opposed to, I guess stickers could be any size, but that's, yeah, I think that's the genesis of that.
So I've got to imagine that, if Fanatics is a company that does like apparel
Mhm.
and posters and other stuff, that, you know, well, you tell me, like when you talk about the hobby, does it include posters? Does it include sports memorabilia? Like people who
Great
have game
question.
balls and jerseys that were worn and things like that?
So yeah, I mean that
Signed
maybe def-
jerseys?
so before I get to that answer, I wanted to say it's a really good question. Who was he saying to? I don't even know. I don't think a lot of us remember, or maybe there are some people who really do. But I will say my understanding of Fanatics is that it's currently a privately held company and that they want to go public, but I don't think that they have quarterly earnings. I mean, the
The
SEC,
investors
like,
call,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
investors call, but you know I could be wrong about all of that. I mean, it's this is we're getting into stuff that yeah, I try not to say things when I don't know them, but like, I also know, I'm allowed to say opinions and thoughts and what I think, or no one's, this is not at all a historical
Yeah,
uh
yeah. They're
recording.
they're a privately held company in Minecraft.
Yes, there you go. Oh my gosh, they're huge in Minecraft. Roblox. Oh, watch out for Roblox. Okay. What is the hobby? So again, this is my opinion, is when we talk about the hobby as a whole, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but I do think it includes all trading cards. Again, like that 2.5 by 3.5 piece of cardboard. And then you have, again, when I see hobby Instagram, I see sports card people thinking it's just about sports cards. And they're like, oh, the hobby, the hobby, the hobby. It's all about sports cards. And then you got the TCG and Pokemon people who are like, when they talk about the hobby, it's just Pokemon and TCG. And I think it is both of those things. Now, are sports memorabilia and paraphernalia, and let's say sneakers, is that the hobby? I would say no. I think my opinion or my thoughts are that it's confined to a piece of cardboard that's
Mhm, mhm.
portable. I mean,
Yeah.
we could really parse into what that even means, all those words.
Yeah, and
But
I gather part of what you're probably trying to talk about is like, are we talking about a hobby or this hobby? And it's like it's not like gatekeep, gaslight girl boss. Like we're not trying to like keep people out necessarily here, but to
I don't
say,
know. Some people
we,
do.
who's the we, by the way. But like
Yeah.
I don't think anyone and you by making that um definition or having that discussion about kind of what you're talking about, it's
Hmm.
not to say these other things aren't also valid and cool and fun hobbies and that there
Right.
isn't, overlap and interplay, but it might
Yeah.
just be to say like which story are you talking about? Because
Yeah.
I
I
think also
mean,
a big part of what makes the hobby and where I actually see a lot of similarity, we have a mutual friend who's really into comic books, right? And he
correct.
doesn't just read them because he enjoys the stories, but he
Yes.
actually really likes the collecting of them
Yes. Yes.
and the maintaining the collection of it and going to local comic book shops. And there I think there's a kindred spirit, right? Because it's not just, what story am I talking about on a podcast? But to say that we're people in a hobby, what do people do? They get together and they talk shit about the hobby, right? Like
Hmm.
when you get together and you discuss and you craft stories together, you're shooting the
Hmm.
breeze or whatever,
Yeah.
having that shared set of background expectations, like this is the stuff we're talking about,
Hmm.
you know, that I think is what defines the hobby. It's the activity that people are doing together.
Right. I mean, there are so many hobbies. I think really early on in my podcast, I mentioned how, if you're looking for crocheting or bicycling or stamp collecting, this isn't the right, this is the card diary, right? And so, I mean, even my name, Denny Cards, I think initially, yeah, it was all about sports cards. And then it was really primarily basketball, and then it kind of bled into a little bit into football, baseball, and then now I'm kind of doing even a little hockey. But then I didn't want to discriminate. I'm like, my kids love Pokemon. They say that for children, it's almost like you go from Pokemon to Yu-Gi-Oh to sports cards. It's almost like that's the natural progression. That doesn't apply for everyone, of course, but yeah, I didn't want to just be like, oh, I'm just about basketball cards, because I
Hmm.
mean
Hmm.
that, and I don't know what in the back of my mind did I think, oh, I want to be all inclusive and talk about all cards or make content about all cards. But I will say, when I think about the hobby, I do tend much more to skew towards sports cards.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think there is definitely some, I don't know if you call it audacity or umbrage for people in the sports trading card community to say this is the best hobby in the world and this is the hobby, because I'm sure there are bicyclists who are like, man, this is the hobby, riding your bike on the weekend and having some micro brews afterwards after a ride is there you go, pointing to the shirts. Um, for those on audio, I mean, this whole thing is going to be audio, but yeah,
Yeah.
TK is indeed a bicyclist enthusiast.
Yeah,
So,
well, still kind of amateur and sucky at it, but I'm pointing. I just went on my first organized ride, and let me tell you, as someone who was comparatively new to that world, when you come
hmm
into a hobby or whatever, and you see people
yeah,
who are real heads who've been doing it for a long time,
hmm
it's like a whole culture. It's a whole thing. There's like internecine conflicts and arguments, and that's part of the fun, right? Like
conflict,
whether you're
yeah,
getting together at the bar or you're posting at the forum or you're on the socials or you're doing the pods or the DMs or whatever, you know,
hmm
I think it's the positive part of like shooting the breeze, but then also like the
mm.
talking shit and the sometimes getting a little negative. And by
The
the way, tell me
drama.
if for whatever Apple Podcast, if this language is putting
Oh,
you in
family
trouble.
friendly. I almost said something after the first S, and then
Yeah, I'll
the
drop
second
that.
one, I will say, please, let's keep it
Okay,
family
okay.
friendly.
I want to
But
keep
yes,
you listed on all the podcasts. I'll keep it family
clean.
friendly.
It's
Sorry about that.
clean. It's all
That's
good.
right.
Thank you.
This is let me
We
take
didn't
off
talk
my
about this
My
beforehand.
Eddie Murphy Raw suit here for a
Yes.
moment.
For those who are listening in audio only, TK is wearing a red jumpsuit. It's just
Yeah,
like,
it's very crinkly and latexy.
yeah.
Um, no, so
Yeah.
I
But
think it's
gate,
so
yeah.
funny. I
Yeah.
think it's so funny how you talk about it though, because I was really enthusiastic to hear your podcast in the first instance, like not only because I'm your friend, but because I think it was very personal, right? Like when you talk
Mm,
about a journey, which I think
hmm
was like a metaphor you were using really in the beginning, it is a card journey, right? And it's like
hmm
your card journey. So in the same way that when you were talking about the hobby for you, it was cards, it was basketball cards, that like to turn the gaze towards you, right? It grew and changed as your experience with it grew and changed,
yeah.
right? Like when your kids started getting into the TCGs, I don't think you were really into them before that, right?
I mean, like you, I did like, I loved Magic cards,
Mm,
and but I
mhm.
didn't keep any of them. Like when
Yeah.
when I asked my parents to hold or save my cards, I'm sure they were all jumbled up. But like when I went back and I found my old collection, it was just basketball cards and some
Hmm.
football cards. There was
Hmm.
like no TCG, and so
Hmm.
I don't even remember opening up, say, like the alpha or beta. I just remember the revised edition stuff and having a lot of strong connectivity towards, oh my gosh, I remember playing the green deck and the black deck and all this stuff. But no, I don't have any of those cards. So when a
Hmm.
friend who's not a mutual friend of ours, but they were like, oh, I would love to kind of like sell my collection or consign or do this or that, and I got a lot of nostalgia going through those cards.
Hmm.
And but when it comes to, say, Pokemon 99, I mean, I think you and I were both like entering into our collegiate years.
Hmm.
So like
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
remember being like, oh, this kid stuff, like, ooh, like, look, I'm 18, I'm too big for Pokemon. And it's like, oh my gosh, if I only knew.
It's well, the funny thing too about that is you know, are and without getting hyper personal. I mean, this is all a nostalgia
Yeah,
podcast,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
you can get real hyper, and I don't mean for you can just get really hyper about your particular nostalgia, and then you
hmm
almost sound like one of those people like reminiscing about the Beatles or something. Um, but yeah, no. So I was super into Magic
Yeah.
for like there's a hot minute where I was super into it. And what I thought was interesting, and this makes me think of local card shops, was to see the um, not the total creation because these things existed, but
Mhm.
sort of a renaissance of local gaming shops because there was a
Mhm.
huge influx of attention and energy and money, but then also just people participating in it when Magic came out. It was such a like genre creating, genre defining thing
Yeah, yeah.
that um it really recreated a whole hobby culture around it, of discussions and whatnot. And so I was super into Magic, but then yeah, we went off to college. I stopped playing as much. When Pokemon came out, it was also, don't forget, it was intentionally targeted towards an audience that was already younger than we were at the time. So we didn't have that same overlap. I never actually played the Pokemon TCG until I did with my kid, a few
Mhm.
years ago.
Yeah.
So even for someone who was super into TCGs, that one was outside of my, window in the same way that like there were probably people talking about hockey cards from a time when you were super into basketball cards. And all of that is just like
Right.
background that you never really
Right.
integrate.
So here's the so I don't know if this is tangential, but here's like the billion-dollar focus group question that I'll ask on behalf of, say, like Fanatics is, you've already explained what got you out of cards, like a lot of us, college and all this stuff, and like just chasing
Mhm.
relationships. But why didn't you get back into cards? You mentioned having the '89 baseball set, partial or full, and
Sure.
set collecting was such a huge thing back then for me as well too. But like, why didn't you get back into cards, such as during a time when a lot of people did, such as during COVID?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great question. And I've been thinking about it a lot, kind of like what each hobby is or does or speaks to a person. I think that there's some elemental component there. I don't want to say it's intrinsic. I don't want to say it's the only thing, but that like it's much less likely that someone would get into a hobby if they don't have that uh, something intrinsic to them that connects them to like the goal of the hobby or the structure of the hobby, right?
Okay.
Because I,
Okay.
I think for the major contrast between like TCGs and sports cards is the TCGs are leveraging certainly for economic purposes, but then they have in our psyches this collection thing, right? Chase cards, the
Hmm.
thing that you were always lusting after, the having a full set, completing X, Y, or Z
Yeah.
probably speaks to the same kind of things you have in a sport card, world or milieu. But for TCGs, there's also a game, right?
Right.
People gather to play the game.
Right.
People want the cards so they can do the game. Um, you can talk about like a meta in a TCG world that doesn't make sense in a sports card world, right? Because you're
Mm-hmm.
not like paying 3 mana to play your Tony Gwynn, who's going to trample over somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think for that difference, sports cards are kind of like a distillation of that collector spirit, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
that chase spirit. Now, why you care about them as opposed to like, I don't know, decorative teapots is because of like the nostalgia connection to the sports you watched, the games you observed, the like, I don't know, tribal affiliations you have with your team, right? Like, is
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
is that speaking to like the things that drew you into the hobby at all?
Ooh, question to me. So you and I, you know this already about me, but and I think I've mentioned this in prior episodes. But so like my dad being a Korean immigrant, and I'm myself being Korean American and living in New York City. No, they didn't really have access, or they didn't have knowledge about how to put me into, say, like youth sports, or like kind of like the things that I do for my kids nowadays, right? So put them into rec leagues and all this stuff. So for them it was just study, do well in school, stay, I think definitely in the 90s there was a lot of latchkey kid stuff, right? Like I'm coming late from work, but you come off the bus and you just kind of hang around, and just there's just a lot more autonomy and trust, or maybe just like lack of ability to watch over kids. But he wasn't really big into sports. I was. I don't know how. Like, I just had a lot of friends around me. Like, we didn't have, again, like, because we didn't know each other in middle school, right? I mean, it's kind of wild that we went to the same school and yet we had different friends. But you, like, I don't know what it was about my group of friends that was very like, oh, we're always going to be doing something outside, shooting hoops or stickball or something. But that was a very kind of like Lord of the Flies things that we did. And and yet, yeah, and then like the whole Michael Jordan craze. Like I've definitely thought a lot about like why do I keep liking this? Was he so easy to root for because he was so dominant? But then again, like in the early '90s, before he won 6 rings, when maybe he had one or two, he was like in commercials. I guess he was just cool, and I wanted to associate myself with that, like you said, like the tribal affiliations that would have had me geared more towards the New York Knicks crowd, right? With being a New Yorker and Queens and all that. But there's just something about him, again, like Michael Jordan. I remember my mom
I
being
mean,
like,
that's literally why they had the Be Like Mike ads and why it
"Yeah,
hit, right?
yeah, yeah."
Like no one's gonna make a Be Like Vince Carter ad. I mean, he's a great player, right? But like he doesn't command that kind of like it's like worship almost, right?
It is so idol worship, and some people disagree. I've had people who talk to me about it, like on and off the podcast, and they're like, "No, it's not idol worship." And I was like, are you just maybe lying to yourself, or is it the
Oh, I'm
word
not I'm not
idol?
saying that derogatorily
Oh
either. I'm
no,
just trying to describe what's
same.
happening.
No, I think some people do think that term is too like it almost offends them because it's either the word idol or the word worship or both of those words together. But, I remember my mom saying when I was like trying to, negotiate for a later bedtime to watch the end of like a game on television, which was, why do you care so much about him? He doesn't feed you or clothe you, like, and I'm like, well, yeah, but you're my, I'm not going, like the whole idol worship, like, the whole like role models and, Charles Barkley being like, I'm not a role model. And there was Michael Jordan, who was like, "Yeah, I am like a role model or something like that," right?
And I
So,
gotta say, with the benefit, by the way, of an adult perspective and kind of us knowing more and peering behind the curtain and all that, isn't it funny to think of MJ as the one who's like putting himself out there as a role model when all the stories you hear about how he behaved around his
mhm.
teammates, how he behaved as a person, right? That there was this huge schism.
Michael Jordan in the current social media age would not be Michael Jordan. Totally. I mean,
He
we're
he
talking
he would have gotten milkshake ducked or like stepped on so many grapes so
milkshake ducks.
fast.
Michael Jordan being milkshake ducks. Oh my gosh. So he's punching teammates. He's gambling. He's gambling during the playoffs. He's going to casinos. He's womanizing. He's doing a lot of stuff that I've actually had a lot of. I've grappled a lot with my Michael Jordan fandom. I actually in the trading card world, I've kind of slowly gone away from his cards.
From MJ
Um,
specifically.
yeah, no, really. And then you have like someone like LeBron who everyone like, oh, the decision, and he's so polarizing, and oh, just dribble the basketball. And yet he, for the last 30, like 20 something years, he's been like clean, like from a PR standpoint, right? I mean, as far as we know.
Yeah, it's I mean, this is maybe going far afield from the hobby, but it's ultimately
Yeah.
the hobby is a window into why we care about these figures, right, depicted on
Right.
the card as opposed to anybody
Mm-hmm.
else.
Yep.
It is so fascinating to me to look at how like so I'm going to out myself as like a double outsider here. I'm not only like a hobby like card guy outsider. I'm mostly a sports outsider. Like I enjoy it here and there, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
not like it's not a major part of life like it is, I think for many of my, peers and friends and countrymen, right, around the world even.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I like that because I also like it. I don't eschew it. Like there are some people who, they push it away. They see it as beneath them, which I think is weird, right? Because it's so
Yes.
universal.
That's
But
like a
anyway,
weird reverse elitism thing. Yeah, but go ahead.
totally. Yeah, the person who's like, well, I don't have a TV at home, like that kind of guy,
Oh gosh, those folks.
right?
Yeah, the Sunday New York Times crossword
Exactly,
puzzle, and
exactly.
I'm
Which
gonna
is
go
just
grow
another
my.
another
No,
performance too,
I d-
right?
I usually don't like. You're such a friend of mine. Like I want to let you say what you wanted to say, but
Nah,
can
nah,
I
go.
just say before you continue,
Totally.
I think you belie yourself a little bit here because again, we'll just kind of open up a little bit. Is we've been to games before, Orioles, and we're going to go to a Ravens game
Yeah.
ostensibly this season. We've been to Wizards games. Like
Pats
we
games. Yeah,
are,
we know what's up.
we're not like we don't. I would say this to myself too. Like I'm not someone who wakes up and immediately looks at the standings and looks at every single local team and I have to know how they did. I'm definitely a fan of sports, but also it's weird when you are again in your 40s idol worshiping, 18, 19, 20-year-old, kids, right? So
Eh,
for
that
me,
is a weird reversal going from the kid who's looking up to these guys who all, as far as you're concerned, are like a million years old because they're all
Right.
older than you, right?
Right.
To suddenly you're looking at, and like literally every player on every field, except for maybe Tom Brady, is younger than you.
Tom Brady, yeah, Tom
And
Brady's
even
old.
even Tom Brady, you're like in striking distance of him, and he's a freak, like
Right. Yes. Everyone drink your water, of course. Sponsored by Tom Brady's water,
absolutely, absolutely.
TB12 water. So, no, but like, you own sports paraphernalia. Like, you're not the guy who has the Lamar Jackson jersey, who's like, look at me, and like, I'm Lamb Jack. But like, you have spent discretionary income
Oh,
in
totally,
the
totally,
sports paraphernalia and
totally,
memorabilia
totally.
world, and
Yeah,
like,
not nothing, not nothing.
yeah, not nothing. So again, like my whole thing is like, why do we collect? I mean, you have a collector's gene. You've collected cards in the past, both sports and TCG, and now you don't. And I'm just trying to figure out, again, like the joke was like, how can I get you into this card? How can I get you to buy this card to drive it off the lot?
Totally, totally.
I'm not trying to be a car salesman here, but like, that's like the whole, like, how can we, what are we 10Xing? How do we
Mhm,
10X
mhm.
it? Are you part of the 10X?
Yeah,
So yeah, just kind of go into that. But I,
totally.
I know you also wanted to make a point too, so I do
Oh,
apologize.
no, totally. I think this ties together actually, because it's like I'll answer the I'll answer the question, and by way of that, go back to that other point.
Yes.
So, you know, the thing I think that's like, and tell me if I'm barking up the wrong tree here, but I think the thing that really animates the card collecting is it's getting into like the minutia of something. There's this
Mm,
impulse to like want to like get into and know the minutia of something, to chase after things that are like achievable but not always immediately achievable. That there's an element of research and negotiation, and you're right, with cards it's also, there's buying and selling, so it's a kind of performance of like of prowess, of
mm,
capability, of success, right? And you
mhm,
do all of it to satisfy, I think, like this own like internal dopamine receptor, but
mhm,
also because you're like, I can't wait to tell someone the story of, you know here's how I found this really obscure card in some shop somewhere. It's like,
mhm,
oh, I was at a shop talking with someone, and we both had a particular interest in this one particular old set. Like, there's a degree into which almost you do all the stuff so you could share the story, right? You do all the stuff so you can talk to someone about it.
mm,
And I think, how do you get someone into that? It's like, you want to get them talking about this stuff, right?
mhm,
Like,
mhm.
I actually, and it's not like a social media strategy, but it's like older than that. It's like a culture creation strategy.
Okay.
How can an industry, if it is an industry push, right? Or um, what happens in a cultural space that gets more people involved in talking about it, so maybe an industry develops around it. So you want to 10x the hobby. I think you got to get like better forums and more people like talking about stuff, and
Mhm.
like it being a place where cool stories can be written about it. Because I think that's
So
part of why sports themselves underlying have such enduring power, right? Because there's like the affiliation with a particular team, the fandom element of it,
mhm.
but it's just nothing but stories. Like, every game is a game. It's a physical contest. Things
Right.
happen. They
Right.
do athleticism according to the rules, right? Someone prevails or someone doesn't. But
Mhm.
the fun is that people talk about it. Like, did you see that guy's catch? Did you see this play? Did you see this? Thinking about this trade deadline or whatever. Like, people love
Right.
it because it's an endless um, source for stories to be told.
Wow. I really like the way you said that. So if I can extend that a little bit longer, to another, like the next point that I wanted to get to, which has to do with like that storytelling and just kind of like tribalism that we're talking about. So Fanatics recently did a collaboration with their own brands because it's within their parent company, with Lids, and actually I don't know if Mitchell and Ness is, but they did a three-way collaboration, right? Fanatics, it was like Tops. which is a car company, Lids, hat company, Mitchell and Ness, like a hat design company, but I know they have Mitchell and Ness hats. So I know you have hats, and specifically Baltimore team hats. So with this special collaboration and the special promotion and the marketing, which again goes to kind of like trying to get into the zeitgeist, right? It's like maybe you don't like cars, but maybe you like hats.
Oh,
And
by
maybe
the
you
way,
like your yeah.
I would absolutely buy a Tops hat.
Well, here
I
we
think that would
go.
be so fly. I actually think that there is something a little meta about it that could
Mhm.
be a really good entree to people who haven't like classically been in the hobby because they've either
Yeah.
been adjacent to it or they've seen it.
Yeah.
Like if there was like a Fleer branded tracksuit, I would 1,000% wear that. And I think, you talked a little bit about sneakerheads. Like I think
Mhm.
that something that like maybe the card hobby can learn from, part of how sneakers got real big was with a lot of like cross media promotion,
Yeah.
and apparel I think maybe lends itself to
The
that. Maybe that
the
speaks more for
Kanye,
Fanatic.
right? I don't know much about sneakers, but like the Yeezys, the Kanye, the Cactus Jack, Travis Scott. I don't. I mean,
Hmm.
music is the thing that definitely makes me feel so old.
Oh
I
yeah.
cannot watch the Grammys. It's the oldest. I'll watch the Oscars and the Emmys and go, oh yeah, I've heard of that show or movie or like and music. I'm just like, oh my gosh, my bones hurt.
You're like it's just like names. It's like Glorpo and Bleemer, putting out an
Yeah.
album. I'm like, well, who are they?
How many little babies are there? There's so many little someone or
Even
baby
littler, baby,
someone,
right?
littler baby. You know, there's gonna be a rapper out there who's gonna be called the Littlest Baby, and watch out, you can't beat the Littlest. I
Actually,
mean,
there can be only one. It's
there can
like
be only one.
it's like a title. The
Yes.
littlest baby is just whoever killed the last littlest
Oh
baby.
no, the Jackie, not Jet Li, the
Oh, the Jet
one.
Li, the one. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the one. I must consume your soul to become the one. Okay, so here's the thing. Okay, they had a collaboration, those three companies, and Lids. I mean, if you're near a mall, I mean, we can
Yeah, there's
go
one in
forever.
literally every mall.
Yeah, we can literally go talk about mall culture and whatever, like the 80s, 90s, and like we're not going to get into the whole Stranger Things season. What was it, 4 or whenever they came out with the mall stuff? Well, no, it was
Yeah,
season 2, I think. Jeez.
yeah.
Um, but they had this special, and it wasn't just in physical Lids stores. You could also buy them online. But the thing was, you go into a Lids, and for $50, 40 or more specifically $49.99, you can get a limited edition baseball hat with a patch on the side that shows, like, say, a generic front of a pack of baseball cards. I can't remember exactly, like maybe even 1989, but like 1989, 1993, like those type of years. And I'm not wearing them right now. I'm wearing a Bleecker Trading. The reason I'm wearing this hat, by the way, is because you and I both grew up in New York, and Bleecker Street. There's actually a card shop, an LCS, local card shop in Bleecker. So shout out to Bleecker.
That rocks.
But you can get a hat with a patch on this, a special patch that normally isn't there, that shows a pack of baseball cards. And in addition to that hat, you get a pack of one pack of 3 chromium finish cards. And the reason I say chromium finish is it's like Topps Chrome, chromium finish being it's more than just like a piece of cardboard and some ink on it. There's some shine to it. The regular cards, the standard base cards, are kind of like a silver chromium, and then you have like serial numbered cards that are like orange, red, blue, the red refractor, the superfractor, which is gold, things like that, which are the chase cards. And there's super slim odds of getting any special numbered parallel cards. But when it comes to this particular SKU, right? What does SKU even stand for? SKU,
Stock
serial.
keeping unit.
Thank you. See,
Stock
you're
keeping unit. You see, I
way too
got you.
smart. So, what you already said that you would buy this hat, but I imagine you haven't been to a mall. At the time of the recording, it's only been out for like a week or not even two. But um, what do you think about that type of promotion or special?
So you joke, but that actually sounds cool. I thought you were talking about a promotion that happened in the past, but you're
Hmm.
talking about it happening now. And part of me is like,
Yeah,
damn, I got to get to the store and
yeah.
buy one of these. So I would say the promotion's working.
So promotion. Okay, so I have heard that, because I haven't been to a sporting event yet where this has occurred, but I have heard that in the past 6 months, again with Fanatics wanting to 10x the hobby and all that, they've had promotions in the jumbotrons and big screens of arenas and stadiums where they're saying, "Hey, this product is coming out, like an advertisement. So on the jumbotrons. So does that type of thing move the needle for you? Like, I mean, I know it's hard for me to say because we're talking theoretically, but let's say you and I go to Ravens game in a month, and this thing comes out saying, what, hey, watch out, we got the newest release of some football cards. Try to find a Lamar Jackson. Does that move the needle for you?
Maybe, maybe. And actually, I mean, God, this is probably a promotion that has been done, for many decades and in many decades past. But like, aren't there also classically like specific sporting cards that are unique to and released only in connection with like live sporting events?
Ooh, so there is
Has
this
has
thing
that been a
called.
thing where it's like, how they have like apparel days or special memorabilia days, something like that with, the card
Hmm.
format?
So this is something that I don't know too well because it is a specific to baseball. My understanding. Actually, they do have maybe some other sports. So maybe it's just that I don't know this, but it's online. So it's online only. Tops, there's this thing called Tops now, and now that I think about it, I know they've had, like, because they didn't have the baseball license, basketball license, sorry, they didn't do this except for, like, say, LeBron James and Victor Wembanyama recently. But it would be hey, this special thing happened this particular day. To commemorate it, we're going to be selling these cards for $5 each on our website, and very sparingly or sporadically, we're going to say you can maybe hit one of the serial number cards that's going to be worth more, but go ahead and buy these on our website. And so they're not in packs, they're not at your local store, but they're kind of like print on demand type of thing. So
That's interesting.
yeah, no, I think it is. It's just that, again, maybe it's because I'm not into baseball, but I don't own a single Tops Now card. I thought about the Wemby card, and I thought about, ooh, like, to commemorate a special occasion, that'd be a really cool thing to do. But yeah, it's kind of funny. I'm in the hobby, and it hasn't moved the needle for me to like want to go and buy those either.
I kind of wonder about that actually. Do you think, and this is going to sound like a weird question, maybe you mentioned print on demand.
Hmm.
So do you think there's something about the print on demand element that kind of like messes with the sometimes paid attention to, sometimes ignored, like, and tell me if this is breaking hobby kayfabe, but like the enforced
Wow.
scarcity that kind of undergirds the whole thing.
So there is this thing that a lot of people talk about artificial scarcity that comes from the serial numbered cards. Uh, let me just share with you. How do you feel like when I tell you something like there's this card called one of one card, right? You think, oh, there's only one of this particular card. It is true, but there's so many products and so many sets and so many variations that someone like and I'll just use the player because I've talked about it before, but Trevor Lawrence, he has over 500 rookie one of one cards apparently that are in print. So is that one of one even special? But this whole artificial scarcity, when you go, oh wow, this card is only out of 5 or out of 10, it's like, actually, there's a lot of cards like that, just not that specific card.
Well,
But
then
those cards
it
are.
goes back to what is the thing you're talking about? Like you maybe
Mm,
to joke about it being a stock keeping unit, like a
yeah,
skew,
yeah,
like when you say one of the card,
yeah.
like what makes that significant or not to you?
It must be collective demand of other people, or like, kind of like a stock market, like, what, a classic thing that people say in the hobby is like, and not just in hobby, but in life, is the value of something is only worth what someone's willing to pay. And so are we saying this card is only worth X amount because two people want it for that amount of money, or just one? But the reason I say two is because, like, in an auction,
Hmm, hmm,
auction
hmm.
setting, you need two bidders to like drive up the price of something.
Well, so it's funny though that you immediately went to talk about like the commodity value of the card, like what can it
Mm-hmm.
fetch me or what will someone pay for, it, which is
Yes.
true, right? That's
Right.
one valence of value, like when you talk about something being valuable or being sought after or desired,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not necessarily the only one, right? Like,
Yeah.
but there is something I think about the history of cards, right? Being that it is like, it's a hobby that developed hand in hand with industry specifically, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was like an outgrowth of a particular kind of entertainment industry, um,
Mm.
in a way that other hobbies aren't necessarily, right? But that it grew out of like part of the reason why people talk about cards almost intrinsically with buying, selling, trading them is they are a thing that was made to be bought, sold, and traded, right? Like,
Collectibles as opposed to consumables. Yeah,
right,
right.
as opposed to consumable, or as opposed to something where it's like, um, you know, there's a utility value to it, right? Like someone who
Mm,
gets really into, bikes, or someone who's really into like fishing,
mm-hmm,
they'll talk about this rod or this bike or this part or this whatever.
mm-hmm.
And part of it, there are people who love to collect. This is a rare collectible cars, right?
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
rare thing. It's a cool thing. It's not around a lot. But
Mm-hmm.
then there's also some intrinsic value. You ride the bike, you fish with the rod, you if you want to drive in the car, or sometimes you just show it off.
Right.
So, but that's the card thing, right? Because there's this sometimes to show it off part. Like, do people get together at shows not just for buying, selling, and trading, but doing like displays? Like, is that a thing in the hobby where
Definitely.
people
Well,
have like
definitely
gallery
social
displays?
media. Well, I mean,
I
it's
mean, well,
definitely
social
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 media
media
to
probably
show
made
off.
the
Right.
cost of that really low, right?
There are some people who put in showstopper cards into their cases at like a local card show with no intent to actually sell the card, and they'll put a really high, buy it value, when not want to negotiate. I don't think I've ever done that. Maybe I should try just to kind of have more people come to like say my table, but I do think that there is
Like
definitely,
prominently displayed, kind of.
or just another card in the case, just so people stop, because I think it's just my opinion that there's so much ultra modern like quarterbacks out there in people's cases at local card shows where it's almost like you need a pattern interrupt because there's so much glazing of the eyes. How many of the same prism and mosaic and all the, I'm not saying terms that you would know right now, but
I get some of them.
how many of these cards can we see? And it's just so repetitive and redundant that, yeah, having a pattern interrupt card would be really cool to have. And I do have some of them. It's just that I don't want to sell them, so I don't bring them to my shows to sell. But maybe I should, just to generate a conversation with someone. Oh my gosh, like look at that Barry Sanders out of 99 card. I don't want to sell it, but maybe that'll get me talking to someone who loved watching Barry Sanders too and thinks he's better than Emmett Smith. Shots
See, I mean,
fired.
but that's the thing. See, that I could see. I think this goes to my earlier point of what people want most of all is to, like, tell stories, right?
Yes, right.
Talk shop.
Right.
Um, but like, what is the thing that makes that 1 out of 99 more meaningful or less meaningful than any other card? Is it intrinsically tied to the potential like seller trade
Oh,
value? But like,
yes.
where's it coming from?
Potential. So it really makes you wonder, again, for some people, cards, nostalgia pieces, commodity. I mean, there's so many things, right? It's like what type of value, not monetary, but just like what type of value are we
What are
putting
you
on these
getting out of it,
cards?
right?
Right. And it's so interesting because does this card represent a piece of your childhood, or does this represent a $50 flip? Like, does this card represent $50 in profit? So I think there is a lot of grappling. Let me tell you, TK, as someone who's not in the hobby, there's this battle between collectors and flippers and investors, and there's a lot of othering of each other, and it can get a little nasty, and like, oh, you're not in it for the right reasons, you're only here to flip. Let me tell you, during COVID, a lot of people came into the hobby who were trying to clean out retail shops, Walmart, Targets, of their sports card boxes. Now you can find it everywhere. But I mean, there's certainly a question I could ask in here is, what did you ever think about those cards that are near the front? But the more I guess the bigger, thing is like people did come in thinking this is, we're in flip culture, right? Sneakers, flipping culture. Let's go ahead and I am going to make 2x, 3x of this money that I put down.
Oh, totally. And by the way, like, I'm not a sneakerhead by any feat of the imagination. I have like really ratty, broken old Asics primarily,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
but
We're old.
I know people who are into it,
Mm,
and like it's eerie because I've heard exactly that same conversation, right? This you're
mm,
not in it for the right reasons,
mm-hmm.
or I'm real because for me
I'm
it's
real.
about like collecting and appreciating them, and for you
Yeah,
you're just trying to like, make a profit.
right.
Um, but God, those things have got to be inextricable, right?
Mm,
Like neither's right
tell
or
me more.
wrong.
Okay.
And the purist collector has, I think, his or her like sort of soul spoken to by the maybe it'll never actually be consummated, but that contemplation of the flip or the sale. right?
Mm.
And even the purest, flipper seller, thinks they're like, Gordon Gekko.
Mm-hmm.
Part of you has got to realize that they do it in cards as opposed to like buying and selling like aluminum on the commodities market, because
Mm-hmm.
there's something about the card that speaks to them, right?
Right,
They're
right.
seeking the thrill of the great sale, but why are they doing it with this thing as opposed to something else? Whatever they tell themselves, they're doing it about this thing because this is speaking to that childhood nostalgia, window into the sport, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. Like, not to get
No,
too, psychology 101, but like, they're not buying and selling coins,
right,
they're not buying
right.
and selling musical instruments. Like, there's a reason they're doing this.
Not to get too into this, but I did want to say when you were talking about consummation and the I'll tread lightly here, but there
It's a
is this
family
show.
podcast.
Yeah, family podcast, family friendly, clean bonus episode. When it comes to reality shows, like there's this one called The Bachelor, and I don't know, like my wife and I sometimes watch it, sometimes it depends on the seasons and all
There's
that.
no such
Bachelor,
thing as
Bachelorette.
guilty pleasures. There are just pleasures. Okay.
They're just pleasures, yes. So there is this thing that these contestants say to each other. It's like, "Oh, you're only in it for the TV time, the clout. You're not here for the right
Oh,
reasons. You're
cloud
not here for
chasers.
love. Yeah, yeah. You're not here for the love. You don't want to actually get married. You're just here for the wrong reasons." And so that's become like such a trope and a cliche in that world. But I do
Listen,
feel
I
like,
didn't, I didn't, I didn't come here to make friends. Okay.
yeah, I didn't come here exactly. I didn't come here to make friends. I love that. But like, when it comes to this show, and I just can't help but think about that you're not here for the right reasons thing that collectors say, individually or collectively to this other group where it's like, wow, you don't love the cardboard like I do. And I do feel like there's this element of like gatekeeping or like,
Oh,
ooh, you're not
elitism.
elitism. Yeah, hobby elitism or card snobbery, right? So I don't know, like, I think that type of way of looking at things does like, turn people away too, like.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a certain toxicity to that, that is like, you see in any, almost any gathering of people about literally any topic. I mean, I was joking, but you're right. Like, this is the academic example of gatekeeping. It's the people who are like, "Oh, you're into this band. Well, you only got into them once they blew up because they were on this soundtrack. See, I'm a real head. I've been listening since whatever, right? Oh, you like this movie? Well, I really love this director's things, blah blah blah, since forever. And you
Mhm,
only whatever." So everyone's always going to be like elitist and snobby, I think, to
mhm.
some extent or not. Some people love that stuff, right? Some people, for them, the gatekeeping is the juice, right? Like, that's what they want to do. It's the kind of story they want to tell, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's so funny that you pointed out that Bachelor thing, because isn't that simultaneously like the most completely incomprehensible thing? Like, dude, you're on the Bachelor. Like, what are you talking about? The whole endeavor is kind of like intentionally gauche and, corrupt and whatever, to talk about,
Right, there's there
the
yeah,
purity of reasons you're on
there
the
is no right,
Bachelor.
there is no actual real life scenario where one person is dating 20 people at the same time, and, like, it's
That
it's a
ordinary thing that
construct.
people do, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah, this is
Like,
not
while the
meant for.
television cameras are on you.
Right. It's like, "Oh, I'm having a real, like, loving moment." It's like you have these cameras right next to your
Yeah,
face
yeah.
to get the best shot.
Well, but the funny thing
So,
is, on the one hand, it's so completely like, incomprehensible, but it is exactly the genuine, heartfelt thing that the kind of person who would be on The Bachelor would say, right? Like,
yeah.
they have mastered that kind of like complete delusion where they actually
Mm.
genuinely believe what they're saying.
I mean, these folks were not forced to be on the show, right? They have to actually go out of their way to apply and then interview and rounds of interviews and then
Oh, and the
get their.
producers, we had a family friend who used to be on a production team that put together some of these like unscripted television shows.
Mhm, okay.
And like, what the producers do to channel it, and this is, very, I guess, inside baseball for something else. Um, it's not just, they always say, right, the story gets told in the editing. When you do the casting, you are crafting a story before a single scene actually gets filmed. Like, it's very much designed to select for a kind of person who's going to produce a kind of content.
Welcome to the Bachelor podcast, powered
Sorry,
by Spotify. No, I
sorry.
love this. I love this.
Yeah.
This
What
is
would the ad throw be?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, I love that. I'm not here to make friends and like, oh my goodness.
But
Did
but
you
but it's funny
Yeah.
because you're it's saying, so you're suggesting to me that like even in the hobby there are well-worn tropes like these.
Oh yeah, and I just don't I think that some people it's funny because I don't want to make this about me and the stuff that I've gone through, but like I think some people are influenced to not like influencers, and yet they don't even know that they're being influenced in that regard. It's like, ooh, these are the people who are like, oh, watch out for these influencers, and but the people who are saying that are in a way influencing. So again, without bringing up names and people, because even if it wasn't you and another person who is like in the hobby, I wouldn't want to like throw all
No,
these
no.
names out there. But yeah,
You,
it's
you
really
you never
interesting.
need to like subtweet anyone, right? But like what you're describing is real, right? Like
Yeah.
they're all those people are also they have a particular narrative
Yes.
that they're playing a part in, right? And they like it.
Yes.
Someone is like there's a lot of ways you could troll someone's mentions, right? Or
Mhm,
like,
mhm.
mess up their comments or whatever it
Right.
is, on the social media of your choice.
Yeah.
But like what is it that speaks to people that they're going to spend their time doing that? It's because they were influenced by or are participating in a community of people that
Right.
likes to, shoot the breeze in that way.
Right, right. Wow, this is wonderful. But I also know that we're at the 1 hour mark and we both have to continue on with our days here, but can I maybe I want to keep talking about this forever, but we
Do
can't.
it.
I
Hey,
might
listen,
just have
man.
to have you on another time.
That
Uh,
one
I'm
that
gonna
works. Two, I got as
Yeah.
much time as you want, at least
Okay.
until the dinner bell starts ringing, and I got to start making the
Yeah.
dinner bell.
Exactly. So let me ask you this, okay? Before I let you go, I wanted to talk about a couple of like, would you rather type of situations as someone who's outside of the hobby, okay? And
All
so
right, lay it on me.
here's a very classic one. There is this thing called sticker autos in the hobby, okay? So let's say there's a player you really like. There for the general consensus is we all want on-card autos because there's some romantic feeling that, oh, this player actually held the card for a brief
Oh, totally,
second,
totally.
right? Sticker autos, they just get a sheet of stickers, like 50 of them or 100 of them, I don't know how many, and then they just like scribble, 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 and just go all the way down, and then they slap the stickers on after the fact.
Mhm.
So, would you, as someone who is not currently in the hobby, be willing to pay more? And I guess this is a really hard question because I think it may come down to depends on how much money, but like, would you pay more for a sticker on card auto versus paying less for a sticker auto on a card?
Oh, that is such a good question, dude. And it's funny because my like shoot from the hip, like before any thinking kind of response is yeah, absolutely. I totally would. It totally
Yeah.
speaks to something. And you already started talking about it, right? Because I think like part of what I totally get about collectibles, because it's funny, I actually don't think I collect very much in my life at all. Like in
Hmm.
terms of like that kind of thing. And maybe that's part of the reason why later in life I never came back to the hobby is
Because you don't have
because
the collector. Okay.
it hasn't been the way that I've arranged most of my life. Like I don't like things come and things go sometimes. I almost feel
Hmm.
like the particular like the physical artifacts, the physical objects.
Yeah.
Uh, but one thing that like it's a little weird for me, and maybe I think as I'm getting older and a little more nostalgic, part of that is being unlocked a little more in me. I am kind of
Hmm.
being a little more mindful of holding on to particular things, especially after I had kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having kids, like, like I still have like the t-shirt with the footprints, when my
Oh
son was
yeah.
born,
Yeah.
that like they put the
Hmm.
footprints on your t-shirt that I was wearing at the
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
And like I do in a weird way, like I have that safely stored away, like it's a reliquary almost.
Hmm.
Um, and not to be weird, I think card collecting in many ways is kind of like what people did in like the 12th century when they'd collect like pieces of saints and like keep them in a like
Mm.
these were the nail clippings of such and such saint. It's kept in a jeweled reliquary, in the cathedral. I'm not making this up. Like
Oh
that's a
no,
thing that
yeah,
they
the nail
would do.
clippings. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
towns would be proud of the like we've got the jeweled bones of some saint like in a
Yeah.
crypt,
Yep.
in our
Yep.
cathedral. Um, but I think, maybe later in life that is something that's being unlocked more. And I think your question's getting right at it, right? Because it's like part of what we're reacting to is the chain of physicality to a piece of history in another person, right?
Hmm.
A person has an on-card auto. And it's not like I'm, dusting for prints and I'm like doing forensic analysis and like DNA fiber stuff, right? But it becomes so much easier to tell yourself the story as you're holding it in your hand to say, I'm holding in my hand what someone else who I've already thought about and told stories about held in his or her hand, right?
Yeah.
It's like when I go to a museum, because I love going to museums like art museums and natural history
Hmm.
museums and stuff like that. You know, there's this degree to which when you look at a beautiful painting, you can say to yourself, okay, well, I could see a picture of that painting. And yeah, there's issues like photos are their own crafting and lighting and blah, blah, blah. And there's
Hmm. Hmm.
medium specific stuff. But why does it matter so much that I'm looking at this painting?
Hmm.
And it's a conversation I've had, with my kids, what matters to me, it's not more or less or better or worse, but I find myself much more readily saying that story of I'm looking at the object that another human being put part of themselves into, right? That
Mm.
like they moved the brush over the canvas and that's
Yeah.
them physically embedded in some way.
Right.
And there's something about an on-card auto that feels more direct, right? If I'm hearing you write an on sticker, they're still signing the stickers,
Right.
and the stickers then get affixed to something else.
Yes.
But that discontinuity, right? Where it's
Hmm.
like they're signing the stickers, but did they hold the card in their hand? They're signing the sticker, but they're not deciding how the autographs, because like different people autograph on cards in different ways, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
they're going to react like when you present them with a card, they're going to see the positive and the negative space like of the graphic design of the card,
Hmm.
and that's going to affect how they put their pen to the cardboard. There's something there that like they've imprinted a part of themselves on it. And I don't know, maybe it's a little too highfalutin, but like for
Well,
me,
it's romantic.
I, I
I've talked about it too.
totally get why on card has a lot of value. And that's the part I get. Like, I think sports memorabilia and sports cards are really similar in that because they're a canvas for that.
Right. So this one, I think it's going to be just as easy, and I want to hear more about it. This is a very, how do I say, like when Panini got the licenses, they started doing this more. It's called player worn. Oh my god, I can't say it. Player worn versus game
Mhm.
used. Okay, so
Mm.
game used patches and relics. You were talking about reliquaries and all that earlier. So some cards have a little window, a little cutout where they can where they can affix or glue a piece of a jersey that they cut out. Usually it's like, say, like not even an inch by inch, like half an inch by half an inch, quarter inch by quarter inch. I don't know. Usually it's a square. Sometimes it can be rectangles, or they can be bigger. They can be a third of the card. I mean, I don't want to get into all the minutia of like the exceptions, but the general standard is like some small box within that card. And then there's also like with an auto and without an auto, but player worn generally is kind of like considered like a sticker auto, and game used is considered more like a on card auto. It's like brings you closer to that athlete, because let's say we're talking just about sports cards here. And yeah, TCG I don't think has anything like this.
Wait,
We're
so
really
help me
talking about
understand.
sports.
Player
Yes.
worn is like, you buy a card and it's a LeBron James, with a player worn window, whatever. It's like a piece of a jersey he wore at a game in performing in a game, right?
No, so here's the thing. There's actually two. I guess again, some people may really not like the way I'm about to explain this, but that's fine. Um, there are some player worn relics or memorabilia where literally they have someone like an athlete at, let's say, like a photo shoot or some sort of event, where they're like, we are going to just have you wear it and then take it off. Oh yeah, here's another one. Wear this, take
Oh,
it off. Wear
okay.
this, walk around your house, take it off. And they'll give them like 20 shirts or jerseys or whatever, and so that they can say not an immediate good strong provenance, but like, hey, we know that this player wore it, or they swear, they cross their heart and hope to
Right,
die
right,
that they
right.
wore it. Then there's this, and I don't have one like I can immediately grab right now, but it's a classic. Actually, you talk about that. I'm gonna grab one because I can find one real quick. But yeah,
Yeah,
talk
no. So
talk
to
to
your
us
point,
about.
I think that's so interesting, right? Because and help me understand if I'm getting it right. Game used would be the player wore this at a game, like in participating in a game, right?
Yes, game
Yeah.
use would
Okay.
be, and they don't say like, oh, this is the exact game or exact season or exact.
Mhm.
They just say this player wore this in a game where like it was actually like
Yeah.
sweated on, or dirt went on it. That's
And
the
so,
things we tell ourselves.
well, no, it's funny because both of these things. By the way, you hear about it. It's like a person buying someone else's used clothing. I'll keep this a family-friendly podcast, right?
Hmm.
But there is an element to that, right? Because
Hmm.
it's about imagining the
Yes.
connection.
Yes.
It's about serving as a catalyst, for your imagination's ability to tie you across space and time to this
Love it.
other person, to this other endeavor. Again,
Yes.
not to be weird about it. I think you're dead on to say it's like the Saint Reliquaries. This is literally that. Like, we're not getting pieces of like, after they do like ortho surgery, like here's a piece of his kneecap or something, it's like it
Ooh,
hasn't,
don't
not
give him
yet.
any
Maybe,
ideas.
maybe. I
Yeah.
mean, if listen, Fanatics,
Oh,
call me.
yeah, right.
Um, you you get a tie-in with like the orthopedic surgeons,
Oh
and
yeah,
then
their
you're good.
signature.
You're in good
Yeah,
shape. It's a piece of his tendon before he had a repair.
I love it.
Um, but like the difference between the two is like which the player worn they can mass produce in a way
Yes.
that feels disconnected
Yes.
from something. It's
So
it's sort of, it's like it's doesn't feel like it's as direct to like a connection across the astral plane to like that imaginary
mm,
memory.
gotcha. So there's so many nuances and variations to all of this, and I'm doing a very general, broad overview with the question of player worn versus game used. There's also like relics where it's like say a one note or one color, and then there's like patches where you have like breaks in like say the lettering of the jersey, so you can have different colors in that window. So I do have in front of me, and this is from Topps Allen and Ginter. Again, not a shout out. I mean, yes, shout out, but like not a sponsor. So this card I have here is from, so this box you buy it for like anywhere between $100 and $125 at your local card shop, and they say they promise you three uh memorabilia or like relics or autos, and usually it's just one auto and two relics. So one of the relics I have here is from Bryce Harper. Boo, because he's now a Philly, and I'm in Nats country.
It's a betrayal.
Yes. So this says this memorabilia contained in this card is not from any specific game, event, or season. So there's this thing called like people joke about it. They call it like the Dick's Sporting Good memorabilia or relic, right? It's like they just bought it off a rack, and they're just like, okay, well, we're putting this in our cards. So there's the player worn where they're like they ask a player to wear something, and they're like, go ahead and do that. There's some where the player may not have even done any. Well, I mean, this I guess could be player worn because it's not specific game, event, or season. Maybe they have them wear it, but then there's some that I know apparently people are like they don't even see the light of day. Like they don't even come near the actual athlete.
Yeah, and then there's the question. It's like, oh, like does that mean that they're like able or not able to impart less of their soul on it, right? Like it's it's all, it comes back down to telling the stories, right? Because part of what you want to say to yourself is I'm connected in this
Yeah,
way. But like where's
yeah,
any of it coming from? It's coming because you believe the guy at your local card shop, because you believe the company that's making these promises, even when they're super lawyered up in the way that they were written, in that other promise, it's like
yeah.
not any particular season, it's like without express written permission of Major League Baseball. um it's funny because it's like I think there's a degree anyone in any hobby or really like in any cultural practice, right? And I think I used the word kayfabe earlier. I know this is
Hmm.
not a professional wrestling broadcast, right? I know, but
It
it's
is
more.
now.
Well, it's
Yep.
more. It's more known in the sport world, but it's kayfabe. This idea of this like this collective shared agreement that certain stuff is made up or fake or
Hmm.
whatever, but
Right.
you pretend like it's not because that's part of the fun, right? That's
Yeah.
you get a bunch of people together playing Dungeons and Dragons. Like we all know we're just eating chips around the dinner table, but we're pretending together because it's fun, right?
Mm.
And I think that's part of what happens in the hobby too, right? Like you look at those like serial numbers,
Hmm.
um, not even to open up a whole can of worms, right? But like the entire universe of appraisers, right? And great grading companies. Like, am I
Oh my
saying it right?
gosh. Yes, you are. And that's a whole nother episode that you and I have to
Isn't
do,
isn't
grading
isn't
companies.
isn't that like almost an like an aftermarket set of storytelling and mutual pretend and like collective delusion, because it's like why does it matter that it's this greater or that greater?
Oh my gosh.
It's because I'm talking about ultimately like the web of social connections and reputation and whatever else they've got. Where does any of that come from? Because we're all talking about the reputation and the da 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 da, right? Like who cares if it's gem or if it's not? Who's telling the story?
You and I have never talked about this, and yet you are like speaking like my language. And the funny thing is, like, I don't think, like, there's sometimes I share some stuff that it's more zeitgeisty to you and our other friends, just to be like, hey, this is what I'm doing with my time. This is why we can't hang out. It's because I'm spending too much time with hobby social
Hobby's
media.
got its tendrils in me.
Oh gosh, yeah. Again, another topic for another time. But like, yeah, I just oh man, the grading, there's this lore and myth. Again, I doubt you listen to it, but there's this thing that I said when it comes to one particular grading company where they're like the resale king, right? And I used the parable or the story of the emperor who wears no clothes,
Yep.
right? And it's just like, why are we all okay with this being like the way it is? So anyway, man, I this is like we're like getting towards the 75th minute here, and I just want to keep talking like we normally do. Like
It's
you and I
good.
just kind of chat about stuff, but not about the hobby. So I think I'm gonna continue to try and wear you down.
Yeah.
Um,
Go
Speaking of
for it.
that hat and the tops Mitchell and Ness and Lids collaboration, I don't have it right in front of me, but you're getting an Orioles hat. I'm gonna send that to you, or I'm gonna hand it to you in person
Right
when we meet
on.
up for the Ravens
Right on.
game. And I will, if I can really hold strong and not open up the pack of cards, I will give you the pack of cards as well, and that can be part of your, new they call it PC, your personal collection.
See
Um,
that's the real thing. You want to get people into the hobby. Part of it you're like, well, what can we do to appeal to you? But part of it is like, what sacrifices must we already in the hobby make to get these new entrants in the hobby? It's like, oh, that's a personal sacrifice you have to make.
It is, it's funny because I think collecting is such a selfish act in general. It's like I want to hoard and collect everything for me, but I think you have to give to grow, and whether that's individually or as a hobby. But yeah, I have to almost, again. I mean, I know you can go buy it in your own lid store and get the pack yourself, but to grow the hobby, I think we really do have to share parts of ourselves,
Oh,
and
totally.
sometimes,
Well,
the monetary.
at the risk of making this a little too like literary a metaphor or something, like I actually think the collecting spark and spirit, it's not like the dragon who sits on his hoard of treasure. It's
Mm.
like the peacock that's showing off the feathers, right? It's like you want to have it, but you want to have it so you could wave it around and say, hey, check this out, you
Oh
know?
my gosh, that is so correct. That is so right. That is so right. I think that's a great way to end. TK, thank you so much for being on. Usually, I would ask my guests how can we find you, but our understanding was this is not going to be video. We don't want people to find you, so no shout outs on Instagram, no social media handles. We're going to continue to shroud you in a cloak of mystery, and
Yeah, this
and
is like
just
I do not wish to be perceived, but if you're super hot and my wife is okay with it, you can slide into my DMs. No, no, I'm just goofing.
to,
It's a blast to talk with you. I uh I would say the thing that would probably most readily get me into my hobby is having a good friend who's really into the hobby, because I think that's affecting me already.
mm,
Um, People talk about word of mouth a lot, but it's also
yeah,
just like the vibes you put out. Like I think,
yeah,
I see how much you get out of it.
hmm,
I see how it, I think, in many ways has enriched your life.
hmm,
And actually, that's the biggest possible selling point I think you could have. I see that and I'm like, oh, yeah, I want a little of that too. Like, maybe
oh,
there's something to it. So, um, that's a hard thing maybe for a Fortune 500 company to operationalize if they want to 10x
mm,
the hobby. But
right.
like, I think that, for someone who's in it and wants to share it, I think just kind of, those vibes get picked up. Like if people see you liking it, people
That's very
notice.
nice of you. Yeah, thank you. I really feel like it has. Again, like I joked about it initially being my midlife crisis. Now it is. But I'm just having so much fun in the hobby, and I think that does show in my social media content creation. So TK, thank you so much.
My man.
I'm gonna press stop here, but we're just gonna chat. I love my favorite thing about recording these podcasts is the post recording chat, and I know we do have to go after that, but thank you so much. I definitely want to have you on to talk about grading slabs, everything else, and just more, and maybe we get you more into the hobby. So we'll see. But thank you so much. Last words.
A pleasure.
Awesome. Take care.